To start with the Whitehouse farm bread, I just finished microwaving my water. There's a little bit of steam coming off, but not a lot. Microwaved it for about a minute and 15 seconds, and I've got my half cup of dry milk here. The handle's broken, but I promise it's a half cup. So I'm just gonna pour that in there. Make sure it all gets out. And since I don't have a very large microwave safe bowl, I just have this basic little soup salad bowl, and I'm just gonna use a regular just a regular old spoon, kitchen spoon, to mix it, just so that I don't make too much of a mess. So I'm gonna mix that, and I'll let it cool while I pour out the rest of the ingredients for the sponge. Okay, now that I've measured out the rest of the ingredients for the sponge and I've let the milk cool a little bit, I'm gonna start mixing them into my larger mixing bowl. So we have the 2 cups unbleached flour, the yeast, which I measured out just to make sure was the right amount, even though I just had the packet. And then here we have the honey. I have a little bit in there, had a bit of a spill, but nothing too bad. And this is a heaping tablespoon. Really trying to get that in there, out of there. And next I'm going to pour in the milk mixture. And I'm gonna start mixing that all up. Okay, I finished mixing that up, and I wrapped it a few times over just because my bowl is a little bit bigger than my plastic wrap is wide. So now I'm just gonna let that sit. I'll start a stopwatch to make sure I let it sit for a minimum of 2 hours, and I will be back. Okay, I'm back. I added the other dry ingredients and the butter and the water, and I've been kneading the dough, and I just did the window pane test. So now I'm going to spray with my non-stick spray, my big bowl. And I'm going to place my dough in there and just turn it about so that it's all evenly coated. And then I'm gonna cover it up and let it sit for the 40 to 50 minutes that are recommended while I clean up some of the original dishes. Okay, now the dough has set and I've pressed it into a rectangle. So I'm going to roll it into a cylinder, just like so. And then I'm going to take a picture of me pinching the seam side. Okay, now I'm just going to pick that up and place it into my baking pan. And I'm going to just press it just as the directions said so that it is touching on all sides. It's a little skinnier towards one end, so I'm going to try to push some of it that way as well. Okay, that looks about even. So now I'm going to cover it in plastic wrap and let it sit for another 20 minutes. Okay, so while that sits and the oven preheats, I'm boiling some water, 2 cups, to put into this pan that will go on the bottom rack of the oven while the loaf bakes. Okay, now the dough has risen and that water was just boiling, so I'm gonna throw that in and do it super duper quickly. Okay, so as we can see, I've just taken it out of the oven and I put it on my clean dish towel. I don't have a cooling rack still, so this is just where I'm gonna leave it, and I will be back to try it in a couple minutes when it cools down. Okay, so we've just cut the bread. It's still pretty warm, and it's kind of hard. I think it's hard to pick up on the camera, but there's a bunch of these tiny little bubbles in it, which I think would make sense given the reaction with the wheat and the yeast and the sugar from the honey, because the sugar from the honey, I can imagine, was really like feeding the yeast. So yeah, looks very good and pretty much what I expected it to look like. Okay, so overall, the bread was pretty soft and airy. It was kind of like chewy when you would take a bite out of it, and then the outside was much like harder and crumblier. But I don't think that the holes developed inside of the bread as much as they should have. And I think that this could relate back to the window pane test, with it being not quite as like able to stretch as thin. So I'm not sure if something went a little wrong with the gluten formation, because that's what that's supposed to show. So I'm curious where it could have went in a different direction with that. I think definitely if there was more water, that also would have contributed to the holes being larger, but even still, when I mixed in the water, the dough was extremely wet and sticky, which it was supposed to be, but I can't even imagine working with it with much more water. So perhaps more water could have aided in some of that. But overall, I think it definitely, with the sponge, went very well because of how bubbly it got. It was really clear that the yeast was really feeding off of the sugar in the honey, and it was really active and releasing all of that carbon dioxide. So yeah, very successful in different ways, and it was super enjoyable to check out this spread. So thanks for following along.